It's going.
Okay, so for this lesson what we're working on is reducing radicals. You should have done this in Algebra 1, but I know some people miss this skill or only get to it at the very end of the year, so we're going to review this one pretty heavily. The first thing you're going to need to do is break down the number that you have in here on a normal one that's just a number into the prime factors. So if I'm looking at 50, I know that that's 5 times 10. So I'm not looking at 50 anymore, I'm looking at 5 times 10. 5 is prime. So from there, I'm going to separate that out into 5 and 2. So I know that 50 is 5 times 5 times 2. Since I have two 5's down there, I could actually write that as 5 squared times 2. And I'm looking for the square root of that. I know that if it's under the radical sign, that's like saying the square root of 5 squared times the square root of 2. The square root and the squared effectively cancel each other out for a given value of cancel each other out. We can talk a little bit more in detail about that if you want to know a little bit more of the details of it, but essentially if we have 5 squared it's 25 and the square root of 25 is 5. So these both kind of go away. We have 2 of them, so we can put the 1 on the outside. It's 5 square root of 2. You can put the times in there, you can leave the times out, but this is what your answer is going to look like. We're not going to deal with the decimal answers that you get if you just type it into the calculator. For another quick practice on this one's 75, and I'm thinking ahead on this one. I know 75 is 25 times 3. I know that the square root of 25 is 5, so I can call this one 5 square root of 3. So this is more like what I'm dealing with. When we get into more complex ones that have variables, you're still going to do the same kind of thing. 18 would be 2 and 9. 9 would be 3 and 3. So I've got 2 3's. I'm going to put 1 on the outside. That's 3. And then I've got my radical sign. I know I'm going to have a 2 on the inside of my radical sign. Then I deal with each number or each variable as they appear. So a to the 4th is a times a times a times a. There's 4 a's there, which means I can multiply them together individually, group them like this, to have a squared and a squared. The square root of a squared is a, the square root of a squared is a. I have 2 a's, so that's an a squared on the outside. Up here, b to the 5th, I have 4 b's that I can group together, so that's b squared out here, and I'm going to have 1 left over, so that's a b on the inside. There were no a's left over for me to put on the inside, so I go straight to the b. Then c to the 7th. There's 3 pairs of c's that I can put together, so that's c to the 3rd. And then I have 1 c left over, so that's a c here. So if I clean this up a little bit, it's 3a squared, b squared, c to the 3rd, square root of 2bc. It looks like a longer answer, but this is going to be the precise answer when we're dealing with something here in geometry. Now, they do want you to work a little bit with fractions. If we have the fraction, the square root of the fraction, 64 over 49, that is the square root of 64 over the square root of 49. Now, normally you'd go back through the numbers like we did before, but in this case, we don't have to worry about it. The square root of 64 is 8. These are perfect squares. The square root of 49 is 7. Just wanted to show you can separate those out, go through them if they don't come out even. These are just perfect squares, so we could move through it quickly. On this one, we have 4 times the square root of 3. Now, mathematicians are kind of a persnickety bunch. You can't leave a square root on the bottom of a fraction. It makes for an inexact answer. So what we have to do is make it to where this square root is going to be on the top of the fraction, then we can move on. So we take 4 square root of 3, and I'm going to multiply this by 1. I'm going to create a new fraction that just has a value of 1 that I can multiply by. That would be the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. So then I multiply across. If you're multiplying fractions, top times top, bottom times bottom. 4 times the square root of 3 is 4 square root of 3. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, this is the square root of 3 squared. The squared and the square root effectively cross each other out there, and we have 3 on the bottom. The last and most complex thing that we have to deal with is a conjugate. When you have a conjugate, it looks like this. We've got a radical on the bottom, but we also have an operation that we're dealing with. This is a term, a single term. So we're going to deal with this and make it to where it can FOIL out, okay? We're multiplying both terms of this together in a way that'll make it to where we have a whole number on the bottom, just like we got here. In this case, I'm just going to put the opposite operation into those parentheses. So I'm going to have 2 minus the square root of 3. Now, I have to multiply by 1, so I'm multiplying by 2 minus the square root of 3 on the top. I'm going to distribute that 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times the square root of 3 is 5 square root of 3. Anything that's outside the radical, I multiply by outside the radical. Anything inside is multiplied by inside. So I've got 10 minus 5 square root of 3 on the top. On the bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. So I'm going to have a 4 down here. 2 times the negative square root of 3 is minus 2 square root of 3. 2 times square root of 3 is 2 square root of 3. So a negative 2 times the square root of 3 and a positive 2 times the square root of 3 will make 0. That's how I know I'm going to end up with a whole number on the inside. The last one, I have the square root of 3 times the negative square root of 3, so that would be minus 3. I can complete this operation. 4 minus 3 is just 1, so my answer is going to be 10 minus 5 square root of 3 over 1, or just 10 minus 5 square root of 3. We'll be working on these for homework when you return on Monday, so make sure you're taking a look at this stuff, you understand it, and if there's anything you don't, be ready to ask questions in class.